Welcome to Web Development Lesson 8.6. In this video, we're going to explore how to aggregate information from NYC Open Data and then produce charts to analyze that information. So let's get to it. So as our motivation for analyzing data, we're going to take a look at the 311 service request calls and see how many complaints were made by borough. Here's our starter replit where we're going to be able to select the type of chart and simply display the data using that chart. So in order to kind of tally up the number of complaints by borough, we're going to need some variables. So let's do Q for Queens, to BK for Brooklyn, BX for Bronx, M for Manhattan, and S for Staten Island. All right, so now that we have our variables to kind of hold those tallies, what we have to do is we have to go through our data set. Now, in this video, I'm making the assumption that you've worked with NYC Open Data in a previous video and that you're familiar with how the data is formatted. So we're going to say data.length, I++, and let's create a variable to help us write our decisions a little easier. All right, so our variable complaint will equal each of the complaints as we go through the data set. So I've already kind of alluded to it. Now our job, now that we're going through the data set, is to determine which one of these tallies, these variables up here, needs to be incremented. So we're going to say if complaint.borough is equal to Queens, well, let's go ahead and update the Q variable. And then the same thing with all the other boroughs. So I'm going to do a little copy and paste here. And this will be, what's the next one? Brooklyn. And we will update the BK. And at this point, I'm going to copy this, paste that. We can make this the Bronx, which is a BX. Then we'll do Manhattan. And we'll update the M variable for this. And then lastly, we'll do Staten Island. And that will be the S. Now, before we continue on with the building of the chart, what we're going to do is we're going to run this and just verify the kind of information we're getting. So let's go and refresh this. I'm going to select the chart, even though we're not actually producing a chart yet. Hit the button, and let's see. So we got 274 complaints from Queens. Brooklyn had 286. The Bronx had 271. Manhattan had 140. And then Staten Island had 28. All right, so we can see that our tallies were updated depending on the particular complaints in our data set. So now to visualize this, we're going to go ahead and create a variable. Let's call it chart data. And we're going to start off with the concept of an array. Again, in the previous video, we saw how we're going to use C3.js to produce charts on our web pages. C3.js has a function called generate that accepts an array of arrays as the data. So here's our first set of arrays, and then our next array will store the values for Queens. And if you recall, the first position in that second array, the arrays that are embedded, is the label for that particular data. So here we're simply just going to put Q. And now let's go ahead and do the next array, which is Brooklyn. And let's put in the BK. Our next array will be Bronx. Let's go ahead and put BX. Let's follow that up with a Manhattan. with a value of M. And the last one is Staten Island with a value of S. Okay, so we have our chart data. And because we're allowing the user to specify what kind of chart to use, we're going to need to pull that information in. So let's say chart type, and we're going to set this equal to get chart type, and I'll review this in a second. So if you've been following along with us, in our helper file, we have a function called get that accepts an ID and simply does the document get element by ID, so we don't have to ever write that again. While we're here, we might as well review our display chart function, which requires the data, the ID of the container where the chart's going to be located, and the type. Let's just verify that that particular drop-down box had chart type and that our div to place our chart is called output. All right, so having done that, we can now call our display function, display chart function. And the first thing it wanted was the chart data. The next thing it wanted was the ID of the container that's going to hold our chart. And then the last thing it wants is what type of chart you're looking to produce. All right, let's give it a whirl. Let's close this out. And let's choose a bar chart. All right, so kind of reflecting what we already saw, that Staten Island had very few complaints, and it looks like right now Brooklyn has the most at 286, followed by Queens 274, and then finally the Bronx and Manhattan. Now, one thing interesting, as as I was looking at the legend automatically ordered it by highest to lowest, even though that's not the way it's being displayed. So that skewed me for a second as I was looking. I was like, wait a minute. How is 286 the first number, but this looks like it's the biggest one? It's because this is the Brooklyn. All right, let's choose another chart. Let's choose the pie chart. And again, it has a different feel, but it is still conveying the same information. You'll see that this particular chart gives you percentages, which again, all this stuff can be modified if you go to C3JS and look at their documentation as to how to add more information or modify the information that's already on the page. The reason I skipped over line was because of this. So one thing that you have to appreciate, and I'm not quite sure what these numbers are different. A line chart wasn't meant to display this type of information. It's really meant to display information that kind of goes across spanning different things. So I would question a little bit as to what these numbers are and how the charts is being developed. Because again, it's the same data. The only thing that's really being changed is the chart that's being produced. Oh, I know what's being. Okay, never mind. So a slight mistake here. And let's correct it right now. Because I don't initialize the values inside the function, because I wanted to be able to show it to you in the console, I was noticing it's like the complaints are increasing. So let's run this again, just as an example. So here's our bar 286, not a problem. Here's our pi, and you'll see, it's still the same distribution. And now when we go to the line, we'll get the same values of 286. Again, it's still not any better of a chart because, again, it's not meant to, a line chart is not meant for this type of data. All right, so let's go back to our presentation and review what we've done. So we handled one particular type of aggregation, which is simply to create tallies. And the process was relatively simple. We created some variables, and we simply went through making decisions as to the particular key that we were checking, and then updating the tallies appropriately. So for instance, if the complaint was from Queens, we updated a variable Q with one more. And then finally, we formatted the data the way C3 wants it, which is an array within array. And we allowed the user to specify the type of chart. We saw how not all charts are appropriate for particular types of information. So for instance, for those tallies, A bar chart and a pie chart are excellent, but line chart, it really fell short of kind of displaying the type of information, the analysis that we want from that data. So hopefully you're excited about being able to analyze your data and enjoy.